Hey guys, in the last video we covered the rear disc brake conversion on the 92 Fox, and we got as far as the brakes obviously installed and ready to go. The only thing we're missing is the parking brake or emergency brake cables. I have some cables here. I'm going to go over them and show you what's involved in making that work on a Fox body. Wish it was as easy as just swapping a cable, but there's a little bit more to it. So let's get into that. Alright, here we have the Fox body cable. This is the end that connects to the drum brakes. You can see the sheath of the cable ends here. You have this long spring piece and of course this hexagonal type end on here. It runs down and the sheath ends about here, and you have a long section of cable that comes out to the round ball that hooks up near the handle inside the car. So on the SN95 brakes, it changes. You can see the difference here. You've got this sheath piece that ends, there's no spring here or anything, and then you have a round piece that hooks in by the disc brake caliper. So this part's different. Ideally you could just swap this. The difference is when you come up here, the sheath ends on the Fox body. On the SN95 cables it runs all the way up, and this piece that snaps in right here, you can see it's right at the end of this short piece. And that's because they have a bracket inside the transmission tunnel right behind the transmission where this snaps into. Whereas on the Fox body, this is on the side of the body just in front of the lower control arms where it snaps into the body. And then it has this, it curls around a pulley in the transmission tunnel and then runs down to the back of the transmission area where the parking brake handle hooks in. So what you ideally need is a hybrid of these two cables, and that's exactly what I have here. This third cable, you'll see it looks exactly like the SN95 cable on the back. It's for disc brakes. But on the other far side of it, it's a Fox body style. So it ends here and has the long cable sticking out. This is a hybrid cable I found at LMR, which is great. It saves us having to get into the transmission tunnel and weld a bracket in there to make this cable work. The other thing you'd have to do is on the body itself where this snaps in, you'd have to drill it out larger, put a grommet on and get this through. So that's a great way to go. The exception to this rule here is if you have a 93 Fox body, it already has the bracket in the transmission tunnel and already uses this style cable on this end. So you would actually be able to swap in an SN95 cable with the disc brake end if you had a 93 Fox body. 92 and older needs to get this hybrid cable unless you're going to go through the trouble of making the modifications I just described. The other change you're going to have to make is to the actual parking brake handle itself. We'll get into that in a little bit. Essentially you have a cable like this that goes to the handle, is on this side here where you pull it, and this end is where the cables hook in and go back. The factory parking brake handle has an auto adjust mechanism in it made to compensate for the adjustments in the drum brakes. You don't use that on disc brakes. In fact, it messes things up. So instead, we're going to install something like this. We're going to cut out the cable in our stock setup, put it in a cable like this with a threaded rod. It's going to go through that bracket, and we'll spin up some nuts, get the adjustment, and lock it in place. And that's a done deal with disc brakes. So let's go get the handle out of the car. Console's out. Ready to get the handle out. I've got a bolt here, and then a little electrical switch here to show when the emergency brake is on. Need to get that out of the way and the wire disconnected. Should be able to pull this mechanism out. Okay, handle's out. That wasn't too much fuss. Here is the self-adjusting mechanism. Obviously our spring is uncoiled, but you can see the issue at hand where this cable is on a wheel that turns with that spring, which would alter your adjustment when you're trying to set your parking brake. So this is why we have to modify this and make it a more solid positive engagement. I have the spring cut and removed out of here now, and you can get a better look at how this works. I also cut that little lip piece that went over the top here. As this handle would go down, that would come up and press this piece right here and pull it back, removing it off of this ratchet, allowing this piece to move. Of course, the spring used to move it. So when going to disc brakes, we don't want this to be auto-adjusting anymore. Now a common method of what people will do is they will weld this right here and lock it in place so that as they move their parking brake now, this piece right here, which is going to hold the cable, is now a fixed solid because that's welded. Instead of welding this, I'm going to take a slightly different approach. And I picked up this piece. This is what was, I think it's 1998, Ford issued a recall where they would install these on the parking brakes handles and they would lock this in place, sort of defeating the self-adjusting mechanism due to some issues. The nice thing is we can use this now. It comes with a screw, goes right on the back side here. You can screw it in place. My idea here is instead of welding this in place, we're going to install this in the car, and on the back here we'll adjust the nuts and tension the cable. Now if I have this set in a certain position, perhaps kind of midway, and I have it locked in place with this, and then over time my parking brake cables stretch. Instead of having to get the car up in the air, pull the drive shaft to get back to these nuts over here, tighten them up to shift this part up here and put a little more tension in there, instead I can just pop open the console inside the car, remove this, and I could spring that back, and I could turn this, effectively pulling my cable up and putting tension in the cable, take the slack out of it, put this into its new position, simply put this back in and lock it, and just like that I retensioned my cable or pulled the slack out without having to pull the drive shaft out, get under the car, all that stuff. So here's the finished product, more or less what we're going to install. See, this is over here. We're going to put that pin on to lock it. The cable goes through, and we have this adjustable piece now with these nuts. We'll spin it up, tighten the cables, and then lock it in place. Got the car in the air. Back wheels off. Here's the underside of the car. The drive shaft's removed for access here. This is the cable coming from the handle inside the car, coming through to the piece that we put on here after drilling out. And I only have one nut on here so far. I'm just testing adjustment and calibrating the setup. Once I get this where I want it, we'll add a second nut and lock it on here in place. And this is where the drive shaft's going to come back in, and we're not going to have access anymore. That's why I'm doing the adjuster inside the car as well. Okay, here's the inside part. You can see I have the ratchet mechanism about midway, and that's addressing, so now it actually works just great. It's parking brake on, off, and you can see when it goes down, this part pops up, and that little piece I cut off allows this to come all the way up so that this can go horizontal. Otherwise your parking brake rests somewhere like that in the lowest position. Now it goes all the way down, and of course I'm going to lock that in place with my handy dandy little recoil piece. I'll go ahead and get that screwed in, and that's going to lock this in place here. But over time, especially since these are brand new cables I just installed, if they stretch a little, I can just come in here, remove this, flex that back like I showed earlier, and just pull this and pre-tension some tension in there. So I think we're good. I'm going to go ahead and get the safety switch back in there for the brake light. Okay, there it is installed, and the neutral safety switch is in. It's all together. Everything works great. We're about to take the 92 Fox out. We have all new suspension, rear end and gears, and all new brake system. So it's quite a bit to feel out and make sure it's all working right. So let's go do a little shakedown. Nothing too crazy. Make sure we got no leaks, nothing loose or anything weird happening. No odd noises. First impressions of these 373 gears are perfect. I'll give it a little more seat time, but those 410s were rough. On the street with a 5-speed, and you know, unless you have really large diameter tires, they just don't make sense. The 90 Fox has 355 gears in it, and I drive that one, you know, a fair amount. Did some gauging and testing, and I decided 373s was probably going to fit the bill better for this car. We'll see once we get out on some bigger roads and how it goes. Everything's quiet and smooth. That's always a good sign. Well, initial impressions of the new suspension are good. It's tracking straight in my lane. It's not darting side to side. It was in pretty bad shape, all the bushings and such. Got new polyurethane bushings up front, ball joints. The rear got new lower and upper control arms and bushings. The lower got the 3-piece polyurethane, and we went 3-piece because it still allows the axle to articulate on the street, going around corners and such. I also put a SN95 sway bar on the rear, just to give it a little bit more stability in corners. And then of course we've got the new gears in there. The whole rear end was rebuilt, bearings, the whole lot. And there's 03 Cobra brakes up front and in the back. Put all new lines in for the most part. A 93 Cobra brake booster and a 93 Cobra master cylinder. And that combination seems to be working pretty good on the initial impressions. Brake pedal's firm, it doesn't treble a whole lot. And the car stops real good. So I just want to get some heat cycles through the car, the gears, the brakes, make sure everything's kind of broken properly and working well before we start to get on it too hard. One thing I'm kind of curious about is how my speedometer matches the true speed now that we've changed out the gears. LMR only really has one speedometer gear option for 410s and 373s. I guess it reads a little fast with one and a little slow with the other. So I'm going to pull up the GPS on the phone and compare. Looks like speedometer's under reading a little bit. Getting about 55, 56 on my speedometer. The GPS is saying we're doing 60. So it's under reading about 4 to 5 miles an hour at this speed. Okay, after a little research and looking back into the speedo gears, I realized I have the 8-tooth driven gear in my transmission. So that's why I had a 23-tooth white gear on there for the 410 gears. Makes sense. So I did some calculations, looked at it again. What I really need is this guy. The red 21-tooth gear. So I'm going to swap that in and see that. I think that's going to work for the 373s and the tire size combo I got on there. Alright, let's get this sucker out of here. Alright, there we have it. Tooth's still in great shape. Pull a little clip out. Take the gear off. I'm gonna go grab a little bit of transmission fluid and just get the inside of this gear and out here's lube, so I don't know how long it'll take inside the transmission before some splashes on there just to prevent. We do have a plastic gear rubbing on here just to kind of stop it from getting galled up before it even gets put into service. Okay, got some fluid on there. Just validated with a screwdriver, turning it in there, that it was actually fully engaged on the cable stub in there. Alright, let's try this speedo thing out again. My handy dandy GPS up. Wow, that's really good. I'm running about 60, 61 on the speedometer, same on the GPS. It's within a mile an hour. That's great. Last video we covered the rear disc. Got some fluid on there. Gotta get that cable anti going.